petrochemical giant Sasol had to cancel its annual general meeting after being disrupted by protesters from the environmental activism group Extinction Rebellion. Now, Sasol's executive board was already under fire before the meeting, with some asset managers accusing it of not progressing fast enough to meet the company's climate change targets, including cutting emissions by 30% by 2030. Now, before the interruption, outgoing CEO Fleetman Grobler highlighted that the company remained committed to an affordable, sustainable approach to the transition to lower emissions. Just One Lab founder Simon Brown expected the meeting to be a robust one. And it was definitely robust. We are now joined by Malik Dasu, Extinction Rebellion Gauteng activist, now to tell us more about the story. Now, Malik, you went to Sasol today, to that particular AGM. For the benefit of our viewers, could you tell us who Extinction Rebellion is and why you staged that protest at Sasol today?
Sure, and thank you so much for having me. Extinction Rebellion, it's really just a group of ordinary South Africans who realized that if we keep banging the doors the same way that we have been doing with our protests, we won't make any progress. So Extinction Rebellion was set up to do direct action, disruptive actions that make these corporates and governments actually respond, and also calls for more media attention to these issues that are so serious. The death of 1 billion people before the end of the century. That's what we're set up to do.
And then looking at that particular protest at the AGM, why did you go to Sasol, and what particular issues do you have with the way they're running their industrial company?
Sure. So I just want to say something, and this is something I've actually only learned quite recently, but it blew my mind when I heard about it. Sasol is the single biggest point polluter in the world. Them and Eskom alone contribute to more than 50% of South Africa's total emissions profile. It's just staggering that one company can produce so much harm on a global level. But the real reason we were there was to send one message to Sasol, and that's that we want to breathe. We engaged communities from Secunda, from Sebokeng, from Vereeniging, the Greater Vaal area, basically to understand what they're living with on a day-to-day basis. We gathered testimonies from people who've seen their children die in front of them because they can't provide them with the medical services they need, because of the respiratory issues that they're subjected to because of living in Sasol's fumes. So that's what we were there to say, is that Sasol needs to clean up its act. 20,000 people every year die as a direct result of exposure to air pollution in this country. And it's just 20,000 souls lost needlessly because of Sasol. That's the message that we were there to send to them.
Now, Sasol would argue they've committed to the Paris Agreement. They are looking to target 30% less emissions by 2030. Have you seen any sort of action from the company when it comes to this regard?
No, right? And that's very clear, right? And just to mention a couple things, right? Nothing of what Sasol is doing is in line with the Paris Agreement. In fact, they're still ramping up their fossil fuel production. Between 2020 and 2021, their emissions increased. In 2021 alone, Sasol emitted 60,000 megatons at its Secunda operations, right? So nothing they're doing is in line with Paris. Just on their own goals, right? This is another mind-blowing fact that I learned recently. Sasol has not met a single one of its own emissions reduction targets. These are targets that they set themselves that they fail on meeting year in, year out. They have not met a single one.
Have you ever sat down with an energy company like Sasol to say, look, these are the commitments you've made. We are an environmental group, would like to keep up with some of the progressions that you make as you try to have less emissions so that you can have some sort of transparency? Have they given you that platform?
No, and they wouldn't, right? I mean, I think there's lots of groups in the country who do that sort of engagement. We're very happy to engage with Sasol. In fact, They said to us, why don't you come off the stage, come into a meeting room with us, we'll sit down with you and we'll talk to you. The head of HR wanted to sit down and talk to us, not the executives in the room. And we said, we're very happy to talk to you, but we want to do it publicly, right? It's no good us sitting in these little boardrooms and Sasol gives a whole bunch of PR nonsense. You know, we've committed to reduce emissions by 30% by 2030, and we're doing this in renewable. And none of that matters, right? If they're not making real actionable steps, then it's pointless. And you have groups who do that engagement, who do that expert engagement. We're ordinary people, right? We basically bringing this issue that people are dying to the public stage because no one else is doing that properly. So like I said, we're very happy to talk to Sasol, but you know, that's not an end for us because we know that they use it as PR stunts, right? They say, oh, well, we met with this civil society group, we met with this advocacy group, and we had a really fruitful conversation, but nothing comes out of those meetings. They don't change their minds in those meetings. They change their minds because they're scared of societal pressure, which is what we're doing.
Earlier on in the week, 91, one of the biggest fund managers in the country, saying they were actually going to vote against Sasol's energy plan at that particular AGM. Does it help to have allies and other corporates that want to see a change, that want to see companies do better when it comes to lessening emissions?
Absolutely. And credit to 91, and credit to Old Mutual, who also said that they were going to vote no, and credit to Just Share and all the other groups who have committed to saying no. They still have to say no. We cancel the AGM today. We don't know when it's going to be moved to, but we would encourage them to say no when the vote is up next. I mean, and that's what it takes, right? And I just want to stress that these corporates have to put pressure on each other because actually civil society voices in this space are quite minimal. Government won't hold them to account. So really, it's their peers who need to put pressure on them. But they won't put pressure on them if there's not bigger pressure from society at wide, which is why groups like Extinction Rebellion, Gauteng are important, because we're showing that there's an avenue for ordinary people to actually make a voice heard on these critical issues.
And what would satisfy Extinction Rebellion, when it comes to this particular Sasol issue? Do you want to sit at the table with government and Sasol and become maybe like a monitor or a peer monitor to make sure that each step that they're saying they're going to reach in the next few years to 2030, they do so, and make sure that these communities don't live under conditions where there's polluted air and water sources that are polluted by some of the operations?
Sure. Yeah. Look, I think a lot of our comrades who are with us today, they're from these affected areas. They need to be the ones sitting at those tables. But Sasol won't engage with them, right? Because they know that that's an affected group. They're not going to believe what Sasol's saying unless there's tangible actions, which is what Sasol's incapable of giving us. And so unless we're seeing those real steps being taken, right, actively reducing the amount of toxins they're pumping into our air, making, for anything, a couple of months ago, had the worst air quality in the world because of Sasol. I mean, just think about how crazy that is in South Africa because of one company. So, unless Sasol is actually taking steps to mitigate the harm and stop the deaths of thousands of people every year, then what good is it to have us at the table? They know the issues, they know the solutions, but they're not acting on them, and that's really what our role is there to do. But I would encourage them to reach out to these affected communities, because those are the people that they need to answer to, not me. I was just a voice in solidarity today. There are real people suffering right now, and Sasol needs to account to them.
Malik, you've spoken about the people that are suffering in Vereeniging and some of the other locations where Sasol is operating. If you're not satisfied with the way things are going, are we going to see a class action lawsuit? Do you have a backing in terms of funding to take Sasol to court?
Sure. No. Right. Extinction Rebellion is basically funded out of the pockets of like 4 or 5 people from their salaries. We all do this as volunteers. We're not we all have day jobs that we do in addition to this. So we don't have resources to do that kind of thing. But the Center for Environmental Rights, I believe, South African communities, South African civil society communities, I believe there is a court case ongoing for Sasol at the moment. If we had the resources, we'd love to be able to pursue those avenues. But also, that's not our expertise area. Our expertise is disruption, and we'd encourage all those legal firms who do that sort of pro bono work to work with those communities to take Sasol to court, because unfortunately they don't listen to anything else. But it probably wouldn't come from us.
All right, that was Malik Dasu, Extinction Rebellion Gauteng activist, a part of the group that went to that Sasol AGM today, and of course it was cancelled.